When we talk about American slavery, a common question pops up. Why didn't they just run away? It seems as simple as walking off at night, or jumping a fence and running when nobody was looking. But the reasoning is complicated. Escaping slavery wasn't as simple as walking off a plantation. Psychological control was a key factor, and believe it or not, some slaves actually preferred life on the plantation. Some others went to the extremes, like Henry Box Brown, who burned himself on purpose to get out of work for the day, then literally had himself boxed up and mailed all the way up to Philadelphia. By the end of the video, you'll understand why escape was often a bad idea, and why Harriet Tubman is often depicted as an angel of God. The vast majority of enslaved people lived in the Deep South, states like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. If you were enslaved here, the nearest free territory might be hundreds of miles north, and you'd be traveling on foot, without supplies, through unfamiliar land, with serious likelihood of being caught. Even if enslaved people miraculously made it out of the South, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made it legal for slave catchers to capture runaway slaves, even in these free northern states, and return them back home. Cash rewards were common for returning runaways, as slaves were considered a major financial investment, something you'd know if you watched my How Much Did a Slave Cost in America video, linked down below. The only true safe destination was almost always all the way up in Canada. Also, plantations weren't open spaces where people could just walk away like much of our modern art represents. Owners and overseers, often hired people by the master, kept close watch of the slaves more often than not. Many enslaved people lived under a system of patrols, armed groups of white men often called slave catchers or patrols, who roamed the countryside specifically looking for anyone that's trying to get out. These patrols could stop black folk late at night, demand to see passes from their masters, and beat, capture, or even kill those without one. Simply walking down a road at the wrong time could be deadly. And use some nuance here. Even walking down a road as a free black person in 1851, for example, could end up with you getting picked up regardless of your free status. What white patrolman would believe you if you said you were actually not a slave? If he didn't believe you, or didn't believe that your freedom papers were legit, you could very likely end up being captured and enslaved. This was actually the plot of 12 Years a Slave, and was really common. Common enough that a network of kidnappers were able to make livings off of it and create the reverse Underground Railroad. If you're enjoying the video so far, or you've learned something, drop a comment down below for the algorithm, anything at all. I'm a tiny channel and the algorithm really likes when you all interact with the video, and hit the like button. The last goal was like 26 and we smashed it hitting 40, so this time I think the goal will be like 31. It's not a ton, but it will make History Helm smile. Isn't that enough for your like? The threat of being caught was a major incentive to not attempt escape at all. Those caught escaping could face merciless whipping, branding like cattle, being sold away from their families, or even death. Other slaves were often forced to watch this punishment as a form of control used to terrify others into not even trying. In practice, this translated to a form of internal policing. If your slaves see one of their own get beaten half to death, this creates an environment where the slaves discourage one another from even attempting to get out. Imagine you wanted freedom, but knew that if you failed, you could be legally tortured, killed, or permanently separated from your spouse and children. For many enslaved people, the risk was just too high. That leads to another huge reason: family. Most enslaved people weren't alone. Many had at least a spouse or relative through blood or through trauma bond, living on the same plantation or at least nearby. Running away meant abandoning them. Some chose to escape with family members, but think for yourself. What problems arise when trying to travel long distances with both infants and the elderly while trying to remain undetected the whole way? The decision was heartbreaking, the chance of personal freedom versus staying with loved ones under daily duress. Many chose to endure slavery rather than risk never seeing their families again. Let me know in the comments what you do in this situation. Would you trade your family for the slim chance of true freedom? I always try to encourage whoever is willing to listen to me ramble about a historical subject to perceive everything in a practical sense, in a humanistic sense, by putting themselves in the shoes of the person or group of people at hand. It's no different here, and I encourage you to do the same. Escaping required detailed, practical planning: food, money, maps, shelter. Enslaved people rarely had any of these things, and most southern states made it illegal for slaves to learn to read or write, so getting directions from road signs or maps was just not an option. Many didn't even know the geography beyond their plantation, and considered that most of the enslaved didn't know anything far beyond how to be a slave. As a slave, having a variety of skills was rather rare, not as if you had the opportunity, and the plantation or your slaves' quarters was your home, and anything beyond that was imaginative at best. And remember, they couldn't just rely on kind strangers for help. Most white Southerners supported slavery, and even in the North, the belief in a clear racial hierarchy was accepted, and the chance of returning a runaway slave for a cash prize was enticing. Trusting the wrong person could easily just mean capture. Once again, be practical. Even if you knew how to read road signs and maps, or even constellations, simply being seen at all by anybody could end up with you being captured, returned, and you know the rest. Despite all this, thousands did escape. The most famous example is the Underground Railroad, which you've surely heard of, a secret network of safe houses and abolitionists. Bear in mind though, a white abolitionist and a white slaveholder usually look the same. People like Harriet Tubman helped guide runaways north, and let me be clear, Tubman was the GOAT, and no media depiction or history textbook or History Helms video could ever give her enough credit. Actually, I don't know about that last part. I'm just kidding, I'm only joking. As a 12-year-old, she suffered a severe head injury when an overseer threw a heavy weight at another slave, but somehow missed and struck Harriet. But rather than falling into mental inability, she instead began having vivid dreams and visions, which she believed were direct messages from God. From this point, she rejected the interpretation of obedience for slaves that Southern planters often taught, instead favoring the Bible's Old Testament stories of deliverance, like the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Once she was in her late 20s, she earned the nickname Moses for obvious reasons, and between 1850 and 1860, she took somewhere between 13 and 19 trips up and down the United States, bringing an estimated 70 people to freedom on the railroad and several hundred more during the Civil War. I know 70 people doesn't sound like that many on its face, but consider all of the challenges against slaves when it came to escape that we've discussed. And look at this map. It's not at all surprising why she's viewed as a religious savior or prophet in many contexts to many people. But even then, the Underground Railroad helped only a fraction of the enslaved population. There were about 4 million enslaved people living in the United States by 1860, but historians estimate only tens of thousands ever reached freedom through escape. This doesn't mean that most enslaved people just lied down and accepted slavery. They resisted in various ways, slowing down work, also known as quiet quitting, sabotaging tools, preserving African traditions, and sometimes just rebelling outright with language like no. Simply leaving, escaping, was just one form of resistance, although it was the best one, while simultaneously being the hardest one to do. Harriet Tubman wasn't alone in daring acts of liberation. One man, appropriately named Henry Box Brown, who we mentioned at the beginning, famously mailed himself from Virginia to the free state of Pennsylvania. Long story short, Box was enslaved in Virginia, renting a house to house his pregnant wife and 3 children. He was paying his wife's master to not sell his family away, but the master did so anyway. So in 1849, he burned himself to the bone using sulfuric acid to get out of work for the day, then literally paid just over $3,000 in today's money to have himself enclosed in a box and mailed to Philadelphia. Once there, he became well known as an abolitionist speaker. Sadly though, this story does not have a happy ending. Box was contacted by his wife's new owner with an offer to sell his family back to him, but sadly, Box declined the offer for several reasons. If you've been paying attention, you know that just 1 year after his 1849 escape, the 1850 Fugitive Slave Law went into action, making it legal to capture escaped slaves in free states. So Box did what any of us would do and moved to England, where he remarried and became a magician. A fitting ending, I know. I can make a whole video on these escapes. There's really just so many neat stories. Although a fun story, the reality of American chattel slavery is that the difficulty of escape and the indoctrination of the slaves by their masters was effective in keeping thoughts of escape unrealistic for many. Many slaves, despite the conditions, reluctantly chose to remain enslaved. It sounds crazy, how could this be the case? Well, for some, the predictability of being a slave was far better than the risk of serious punishment or death that came with escape. I wouldn't necessarily label this as Stockholm Syndrome, but it's important to note that despite the inhumane treatment daily, some of the enslaved chose to remain on plantations as they would at least still be near family, know where the next meal would come from, and have access to shelter. It's the classic "the devil that I know over the devil that I don't." Beyond this, understand that slaves were considered expensive legal property, creating an incentive for slave owners to keep them from slave catchers and keep them alive. So why didn't they just run away? Family connections, a slave-catching society, the predictability of remaining a slave, and the arduous journey to free soil. The system of chattel slavery was designed top to bottom to trap people physically, emotionally, and socially. The fact that so many still tried, though, against impossible odds, shows just how deep the human desire for freedom really was. The system was built to make escaping nearly impossible. That's not a failure of the enslaved, it's proof of the brutality of slavery itself. I really appreciate you watching till the end of the video. That helps my channel grow more than you will ever know. Odds are if you watched this far, then you probably enjoyed what you saw. And there should be by now a video or two on your screen similar to what you just watched. If you got some level of value out of what you just watched, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you as always.